Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you to everyone for turning up this evening and providing me with this opportunity to speak. Hopefully, this is going to be interesting and informative. I'm not sure if I have got the answers, but I'm hoping that I can direct you towards where the answers may lie. The views are expressed are my own, based on over 15 years' experience in the private sector, working on a number of retail schemes, retail regeneration, and retail warehousing operators, and as Joe said, as part of the government's High Streets Task Force. And also based on my experience of town centres, I've lived in a number of different locations as a child and as an adult, and just what I have learned and what I've seen from that. It's quite interesting that 2 years ago I was attending a lot of roundtable events and debating the requirement for flexibility in the use classes order in order to support the high street. At the time, I wrote an article which stated consumer habits are constantly changing, which in turn leads to a change in the operators that are going to be successful. Offering something that is not available on the internet is always going to be a successful tactic, as evidenced by the growth in nail and beauty salons and dog grooming parlours. I'd just like to take this opportunity to apologise to all those nail bars and dog grooming parlours, because unfortunately they were the ones that were not able to pivot when we had the lockdown as a result of the pandemic. Now, I'm just hoping that what I say tonight doesn't end up having a similar effect on some businesses. So fingers crossed on that. So just before we sort of move on, it's worth considering what are town centres. Now, unfortunately, in the work that we do, when we go out on site, we take a picture of all vacant units. So we have got a lot of pictures of vacant units on our system in the office. So these are just some of the most recent ones. And if the popular press was to be believed, this is what the town centre everywhere are. They're full of vacant shops. There's underinvestment. Why should we worry about the town centres? We need more houses. Let's just put all the houses in the town centre. We can get everything we need online. So why do we need town centres anymore? But I think it's important to realise that town centres are about much more than just the retail, which is often what gets reported in the press. I'm hoping there's no Greek scholars out there, but the town centre is developed from the ancient Greek marketplace, or the agora. Apologies if I pronounced it incorrectly, which is the place that the exchange of goods and services took place, along with courthouses and other regulatory functions. So I think it's important to reflect on that where we are today, that actually they're places to meet and engage with others, to exchange goods and services, and actually sometimes just to do nothing but to sit and watch. A report produced by the Office for National Statistics has also indicated that high streets are responsible for 14% of jobs. So as well as being important locations, they are actually important economic generators of income. So based on just the job creation alone, it's clear that town centres are important. And this is the same report from the Office for National Statistics. Now, apologies, I've not actually selected very good colours, but it looks at high street addresses and whether they're registered as retail, office, community, leisure, or residential. Now, again, it highlights that sort of nationally, the picture is just under 30% of high street addresses are registered as retail. Now, there is some regional variation, with that being a lot lower in London as a result of high demand for housing and the land values enabling that. But I think it's quite clear that actually where we are today, town centres are about more than retail, and the picture that we're painting about the future, whilst it includes retail, there are also other important uses that we need to include. It's been well documented that COVID affected all of our shopping patterns, and many of these changes that have been played out as a result of these changes were happening before. Just to start with, an increase in online shopping. There was a huge growth in online shopping as a result of the pandemic because nobody could go shopping. I'm sure everybody has either increased their online shopping or have started shopping online for the first time. And I'm sure there's some people we thought who would never go to online shopping who have embraced it because it was the only way to obtain goods. Now, these two graphs, apologies if they've come out a little bit small, but This is information produced by Experian, who are one of the big data providers. And every year or so, they produce a report looking at online shopping, which they call special forms of trading. And it just shows the expectation projecting forward. So looking at comparison, so that is your non-food items. So it's your clothing, your books, it's cards, it's that sort of basically things that you don't eat or drink. The yellow line is the prediction in November 2016 of how fast the growth of online shopping would take place. The silvery grey line is sort of the December 2018 edition of the same document. So they didn't do one in 2017. So just 2 years later, the estimates were coming out that it would be a lot higher. And we had two that came out in 2020, one in February and one in October. The one in February was clearly pre-pandemic, but again, that was identifying that online rates of shopping would accelerate. And then the blue line is the data that came out in October last year, and it shows, I think, as we would all expect, a peak. But it is noticeable that peak has then dropped off whilst the overall trend is one of increasing. I think that the increase in convenience online expenditure, so your food and your drink, that was more pronounced, and I think that was just as a result of everybody trying to get online and buy food. So there are sort of it is changing slightly. There was a shock to the system, but it seems to have settled down. But those rates are still higher. And just looking at it, this is information produced by the local data company, just looking at it as a proportion of all retailing by category. So it's looking at the first half of 2019, 2020 and 2021. Now, obviously the first half of 2020 picked up the majority of the lockdown. It's interesting to see the start of this year, actually, when you look at all retailing, that had dropped from a high of the previous year. And whilst it is still higher than it was, that there are signs that actually people are maybe coming back to shops. I think it's important to remember that online shopping isn't necessarily just deliveries to your house. Sometimes that online shopping has been sourced from stores, and sometimes you go to the store to collect your online shopping order. And if anybody's ever been into a department store or similar to try and pick up their customer order, they will know that the customer collection desk is at the back of the store, so that you generally have to walk past everything else in the store, and their hope is that on your way you pick up something else. So that they are quite clever in how they use online shopping, but I think it's undeniable that the ease and access to technology and people's ability to use that technology has increased as a result of the pandemic. The other sort of change in shopping patterns has been an increase in shopping local. I'm fortunate in where I live that my local shop every day during lockdown was getting a fresh delivery, a 7.5 ton truck of fruit and veg, and it was spilling out all over the pavement. And I was speaking to colleagues who were, saying they were struggling to buy onions, and I said, well, we've got 4 different varieties in the local shop. What do you want me to send? So I think it made people explore their local area a lot more, and support local independent businesses. I think particularly in larger cities where people may not spend much of the day in their immediate area. I've certainly discovered shops that I didn't really know existed beforehand. And I think people have felt a lot more connection to their local area and keen to support those small local businesses. The other change that has come out of the COVID pandemic is that we finally accepted we can sit outside and eat and drink. This originally came out of restaurants trying to increase their number of covers, and the government trying to keep us all outside still. That there are obviously temporary amendments to pavement licences to allow this to go forward. I think it's important to highlight that whilst outdoor dining is great, we need to make sure we're not commercialising the public realm. So if you can't afford the coffee and the cake or the sandwich, that actually you've still got access to that public realm. I'm just going to move on to a few slightly depressing tables, shall we say, just looking at vacancy rates on a number of different levels. Again, this is information from the local data company looking at the past 3 years on a regional basis. Now, vacancy has risen by more than 1% across all regions in the country. I think probably most people would have expected that to occur. We've seen a lot of closures, and as the pandemic, sort of the effect of the pandemic has made itself felt, it's something that is not to be sort of, we were all expecting it. Compared to the first half of 2019, the biggest increase in vacancy rates has been across Greater London, and that's been of more than an increase of more than 4%. I don't really want to dwell too much on sort of regional differences, but it's obvious that there are some parts of London, particularly city centre areas, and those centres that are more reliant on the multiples that have been closing units, that has led to that uplift. I think it is worth highlighting that the northeast is quite concerning. That's over 20% of units are vacant, which is 1 in 5. So, I mean, that is quite a serious problem. I don't think I can solve that in today's presentation, but yeah, they're one of the regions that there is a concern about how that can be addressed, particularly because where the residential values are not correct, the potential to change it to residential is not the same as in, say, Greater London, where the residential values are there. The other thing to look at is persistent vacancies. So whilst the vacancy rate has been increasing, it's worth also looking at the proportion of space that's been vacant for a long period of time. It's generally considered that units that have been vacant for more than 3 years are challenging to occupy, because generally by that point they will need some level of capital investment to attract an occupier. Shopping centres have seen the highest percentage of short-term vacancies, just as a result of the sheer volume of closures during the pandemic and multiple retailers reducing their representation across the country. It's also worth noting that shopping centres have got the highest percentage of units that have been vacant for more than 3 years, which again, they're finding it difficult to get tenants for the space that's only just been vacated, and they're really struggling with the space that's been vacated a long time ago. I think it is worth highlighting that not all shopping centres are the same. That the shopping centre category used in this chart includes quite a wide range of centres. I think the community shopping centres, which were anchored by a food retailer, were less exposed to the sort of the fashion and casual dining, have actually performed far better than sort of some of the fashion-led schemes. At the beginning of the pandemic, the food retailers were the only ones that were allowed to be open. So yeah, people have sort of stuck with their community local centre, which again sort of picks up the shopping locally, but not wanting to go to the bigger centres, to actually just meeting your needs at the smaller centres. This is just another way of cutting and carving vacancy rate, shall we say. Just looking at it on a town profile basis, I think this is the same halves of each year. Commuter towns have been resilient as workers have been encouraged to work from home, which has increased the footfall in local areas. Again, slightly London centric, but if people were commuting into London and buying a coffee every day, and they're only going into London 2 days a week, there's 3 coffees that can be bought in the local coffee shop, which again has helped support commuter towns not be affected as badly. Interestingly, seaside towns have also remained relatively resilient. In part, that's been due to the staycation over the summer and into the autumn, and the fact that they tend to have a greater proportion of independent retailers and fewer comparison goods operators, which are the ones that has seen most of the closures. Shopping centres and city centres have been impacted by a low proportion of the independent retailers, and the exposure to more at-risk categories such as fashion and department stores. I know my local centre, Wimbledon, the Debenhams is closed, the Gap is closed, the Gap's been turned into a vaccination centre and you queue outside the Debenhams. So it's gone from a centre that had a lot of, it was anchored by a department store and a lot of fashion to, if I'm honest with you, looking a little bit sorry for itself. But it's worth saying it's not all doom and gloom. So there have been openings. The headlines can sometimes mask what is happening on a more local level. The chart on the left just highlights in the first half of this year the count for openings. Now, the greatest number of openings has been in fast food takeaways, which I think is probably self-explanatory. But there's been a lot of new operators coming into that market. And in addition, sort of closely behind, has been new convenience retailers, which has predominantly been independent traders coming forward. And in addition, the convenience market in particular has seen a rapid growth in the grocery delivery businesses. I'm not sure if they've made it to the southwest yet, but we have things like Zap, Wheezy, Get Here, and Gorillas, who will bring food to your door within 10 minutes. They'll bring toilet paper and washing up to your door within 10 minutes, or a pint of milk. Personally, I'm question the need for that, but they're clearly doing very well in the market, so I'll just keep that opinion to myself. The other growth category has been barbers. They have been growing very well for a number of years, and I think it's clear that following lockdown, it's not necessarily as easy as everybody thought to cut their own hair. But I think part of the reason barbers have been successful is they're a place to hang out. I know a lot of the barbers around me, you walk past and there's a group in there, and it's seen as it's a thing to do, and you can't buy it online. And then one question that's often asked about independents is their sustainability. What is the turnover? We all know shops that were like, I'm sure there used to be a shop there. What happened to it? And that they last a year, 2 years. So this is just a chart looking at the number of retailers in the different categories that are still open after 1, 2, and 3 years. It's noticeable that discount and surplus stores, a third of them have closed after 3 years after opening. So it's quite, as a landlord, if you're looking for a tenant, it's quite interesting to understand the survival pattern and the trends for independents when they're looking to sign up a new tenant for a vacant unit. And I think landlords are increasingly seeing the benefit of bringing independents into schemes, because they've got the ability to bring diversity to an area and can generate a local following of loyal shoppers, and you end up with a curated mix of products that's unique to your location, rather than the same multiples that are all in the same town. The Clone Towns report came out, I think, 5 or 10 years ago, and again that was very damning, that you could go to one high street and it looked the same as the next because it had exactly the same retailers in it. And just building on the sort of the independence and the multiple thing, this just shows a graph of the overall balance, if you like, in terms of openings and closings of independents and multiples. Now, more independents opened than closed in the first half of this year, and that's for the first time in 4 years. We haven't had that pattern from multiples for some time now, so it's clear that there are glimmers of hope, that there is growth there, and it seems to be at the moment the independents leading the way. So just to summarise what the local data company came up with in their market analysis for the first half of this year, independent resilience continues. So independent traders are opening, people are shopping more locally, they're supporting those traders, and I think some people, maybe as a result of lockdown and a re-evaluation of lifestyles, have thought, I've always wanted to open that shop, so now's the time. So that they are more resilient than the multiple retailers. Shopping centres face a tough road ahead. Those that are dependent on fashion, department stores, there are less retailers in the market now, so by definition there is less demand for that floor space. So we are seeing increased vacancies in shopping centres and more long-term vacancies. There is a growth in the fast food market and the number of operators out there, and also a growth in food delivery. Now, some of this is served from the high street, but some of it is served from fast food in particular, used what we call dark kitchens, which is just the kitchen element of a restaurant, not on the high street, but well located relative to where they want to deliver, so that they're not. There's nothing worse than being a customer in a restaurant and your order's been delayed because people are coming in on a moped to collect deliveries to take elsewhere. So this is the way that operators are getting around that issue. And also there's a growth in food delivery, as I mentioned. Vacancy rates are rising, but the pace of that growth has slowed. I'm very conscious that the full effect of COVID and the impact hasn't been felt yet in terms of openings and closings, and maybe some people are just hanging on for another 6 months to see what happens. So, watch this space. I don't think we've quite seen that play out yet. And city centres have actually been hit hardest by everybody working from home, because nobody needs the goods and the services next to their office if they're not in their office. That is starting to come back slowly in London in particular, but I know it's not the same picture across the whole capital, really. It very much depends on where I work near London Bridge. We've got a number of tourists coming back in, which has helped support it, but back in the city, a lot of places haven't reopened. So that's the sort of a little bit of doom and gloom, hopefully a little bit of light. Now I'm hoping to move on to what we can do or what we can try and do to deal with all of this. So, the classic marshmallow picture. It's not because we all need to go and toast our marshmallows on our bonfires later this week. It's actually the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment, which is about delayed gratification for greater reward. And again, you may think, what on earth has this got to do with the future of high streets? But my theory that I've written about previously is that an increase in our emotional intelligence is bad for our town centres. So I'm going to introduce you to Thomas, who's 10. He also happens to be my godson. He loves nothing more than to go into shops and buy things. He's an absolute pain when you're out shopping. He just wants to buy things because they look cool or because we need it, and you question exactly why you need these things. And when it comes to trainers, he wants to go into a shop and come out of that shop with a pair of trainers. And then you've got his dad. He doesn't enjoy going to the town centre. He's a bit grumpy about him to go shopping. Doesn't want to have to deal with using the parking out. Doesn't want to park the car, get out of the car, go to the town centre, and have to deal with the fact that Thomas will make you buy more than a pair of trainers. When you can sit at home, go online, you've got a greater choice, possibly cheaper as well, and they'll deliver them the next day. What has happened, between Thomas and his dad? How can we make sure that Thomas stays as Thomas, as the shopkeeper's dream, so that it's each centre needs that irresistible marshmallow. It's your unique selling point. And that marshmallow can be anything. It doesn't have to be, we've got a John Lewis, look at us, that's our anchor, because we all know what can happen if you're reliant on a commercial operator. I've done a lot of work up in Sheffield historically, and actually, whilst they have got a number of department stores, their selling point is the public realm. And it is, if you've never been, I would take a look. It's a great public realm. It's all well thought out. There's spaces that become a beach in the summer. They become an ice skating rink at Christmas. There's always something going on. So it's not being reliant on one specific marshmallow, if you like, because that can make you susceptible to economic change. Whereas something like the public realm, it's not going to, whatever happens to the commercial market, the public realm is still going to remain. So now we know we need to find a marshmallow. The question is how do we find that marshmallow? Now, community engagement is a very important part of any journey that a town takes, and it's important that all sectors of the community are involved. Now, we do quite a lot of community engagement as part of our work, and the way we do it has changed over the course of the pandemic. We now do a lot more online, and we're finding that some people are more comfortable looking at things online and submitting comments online rather than turning up to a drafty village hall on a Wednesday evening in December and providing comments. But I think it's important to make sure that we're accessing the community and going to where the community is rather than expecting them to come to us. I think it's important when we come up with visions that we don't forget the people who shop in that centre on a daily basis and who rely on that centre. So the residents are critical in any part. In addition, you've got visitors to the centre for whatever reason. If you're trying to create a tourist destination, then are we providing what those visitors want? Businesses and investors, they want to know that this is a town they should be investing in, whether that's sort of buying property or for businesses. Do we want to open an office in this location? Is this the right location for us? And then let's not forget the workers who maybe don't live in the centre but work there each day. And again, if they're popping out to buy things, actually the amount of money that they spend in shops each week and the services that they need could be an important part of the success of a centre. And again, just local knowledge and resources are key in any successful regeneration scheme. There's enough research that's been written, but ultimately nobody knows the individual centre better than the residents. And I don't know if anybody saw this campaign. I think it was on the BBC over the website, on the BBC website over the weekend, of protesters at the Bramley shopping centre in West Yorkshire. They've called themselves a place to sit. Essentially, the shopping centre operators have removed 22 benches from the centre, and they've started protesting about this. And they take their own chairs, and they every Saturday. The comments that I've made is, it sounds daft, but benches help equality and well-being. It seems like a tiny thing, but it is massive, and it's just one of those that actually. You look at them, why on earth have we got this bench? We don't need all these benches. But actually, I think the shopping centre owners are possibly now backtracking slightly and trying to reinstate the benches, because it's become clear that they're an important part of the local community to those local residents. So it's always worth listening to the local residents. And again, it's engaging with the people that don't normally come to those to the public consultation events, which brings me on to young adults. It's scary, but you look at teenagers today; they're the consumers and custodians of tomorrow. Which, when you look at some of them, is quite frightening. But we need to find a way to engage with them, to insist in creating ownership of town centres. If we can get them into the town centre habit, if you like, as a teenager, it then becomes second nature. When they're a young adult with more spending power to visit that town centre. And Grosvenor, one of the London landlords, undertook some research called I Live Here Too, to gain a better understanding of young adults' views on activism, community engagement, and the opportunity to have a voice in the future of their neighbourhood. They spoke to over 500 16 to 18-year-olds across the country, just to get a broad cross-section in terms of values, beliefs and experiences from both urban, suburban and rural areas, and also different socio-economic backgrounds, just to sort of try and get a picture of what the existing opinions were. And in answer to the question of would you like to be asked more about the future of your neighbourhood, 82% of respondents replied yes. So that there is a clear desire among young adults to have some input into the future of the places where they are going to live. And I think it's sort of up to developers and other interest groups to make sure that we are tapping into that, because yes, 18% are not interested, but the vast majority are. And I think it's also worth highlighting that the report threw up different answers depending on the location of the young adults. So 56% of young adults from rural locations said they were most likely to speak about transport issues, whilst in the urban locations, 56% were most likely to speak about housing issues. So it's clear that we can't just sort of say, well, we spoke to the young adults in that case. This is what they thought. Each piece of public consultation requires re-engagement with the young adults. Now, this chart on the left, one of the questions asked was, who has the least power in making decisions about the future of your neighbourhoods? And it's clear that they felt that they had essentially very little power in influencing the future. So out of this research, a youth engagement toolkit has been prepared called Voice Opportunity Power, which has been a collaboration between ZCD Architects, Grosvenor, TCPA and Sport England, which just provides a useful toolkit when undertaking development. I know that Grosvenor has set up a Mayfair Youth Forum and are working with young people in the area, saying to them, what do you want out of the area? And I think once young adults see that it's their centre and they've got buy-in, they then become more attached and more invested in that centre going forwards. I think all this slide does is demonstrate why I really shouldn't do graphic design. Is what I've attempted to show here is that when we're thinking about town centres and how they operate, we need to think about the flow, and that is both of goods, services and people. So starting with the jumper in the middle, how does the jumper get to the shop? So we've got a lorry there taking the jumper to the shop. How does the shop worker get to the shop to sell me the jumper? How do I get from my house to the shop to buy the jumper, and then how do I get home again? So it's thinking about how all of those work together. Now, if every shop is getting deliveries every day, you've got a lot of lorries delivering maybe not very much. Now, in the run up to the Olympics, to reduce the number of deliveries, there were sort of depots dotted around outside London, so that each lorry then going into Stratford was full. So rather than each shop having 2 crates delivered in one lorry, each lorry that came in had all of the crates for all of the stores. So it's a way of thinking about how do we get the goods into the shops in the least disruptive way, and then how can they be taken home in the least disruptive way. And again, this integrates with the increase in online shopping, and is it worth having larger or Amazon locker style things in the town centre so that we haven't got the white vans trailing around every single residential area delivering all of the goods. I know that down my street I recognise the Hermes delivery man. I think there's probably quite a few of us who are on first name terms with delivery people, so it's finding a way to actually reduce the number of sort of shorter trips being made by do we go into town once a week and collect everything that we've ordered on the internet rather than things being delivered in dribs and drabs. The other sort of key thing that comes into this is the last mile logistics for a lot of companies, and particularly internet deliveries. How do they deal with that final element of the delivery? And if we have got a lot of short trips being made, is there a way that can be reduced? And I think once we've looked at how goods flow around the centre, we also need to look at how people are getting around the centre. So how are they getting from one marshmallow to the next marshmallow? What's the legibility, the signage? Is it coherent? Is it intuitive, or do you have to cross a large road that means that actually anybody who's not familiar doesn't make that connection? So it's just looking at how the centre flows, and again it's how it flows from everybody's perspective, be that somebody arriving by bus, be that with somebody with additional needs or whatever they may be. Just how does the centre work? Because I think we would all spend more money and spend more time in the town centre if it was easier. You know, I didn't go to that shop because I couldn't be bothered to cross the main road. It's not fair on that shop, but I'll go and buy whatever I was going to buy online. So having sort of just talked around a few of the issues, I think it's a case of where do we go from here? So I think the first thing all towns need to do is find Thomas, because he will just go into all the shops and he will buy everything. Admittedly, he doesn't fund that. But if we can't find Thomas, I think we all just need to be a little bit more Thomas, and go into our local centres and buy something. I appreciate that this doesn't necessarily fit with the not buying too much stuff and the current sort of recycling and waste crisis, but if we could buy non-plastic things, that would be good. And again, it's using our local shops to do the internet ordering for us, because it's a lot easier if somebody else battles the website and just phones you up and says, I've got it in stock now. So yeah, it's either find Thomas or find your inner Thomas. And just, I think I've said it on presentations before, just if everybody commits to going out and spending an extra £10 a week in the high street, that's a significant amount of money suddenly being spent in the local area. I think engagement with all stakeholders is key. We need to create high streets and town centres that people want to visit, and it's things like the high street environment that have a key impact on whether people want to go in. Traffic and air pollution, again, are key considerations, and if people don't feel safe or the centres aren't accessible, then it is going to drive people towards online shopping. So I think by engaging with all stakeholders and going out and finding those teenagers and asking them, what do you want from your centre? This is your town as well. I think we can create the high streets that people want. The other key thing is flexibility. As I said at the start, the change to the use classes order that we were talking about 2 years ago and that's been in effect for just over a year has created greater flexibility just for units to change between being a shop and being a cafe. The other thing it's enabled is there's companies out there at the moment, one in particular called Souk, who take vacant units, essentially paint them white, fit digital screens around them, and they can be hired by the hour, the half day, the day, for a variety of things, a pop-up shop, charity shops, meetings, yoga studios. And the idea is that you send your graphics through and they put them on the digital screens, and they can provide the hanging rails. So if you just want, you've made some goods and you want a pop-up sale, you can just hire that unit for 2 hours, go in, see how it works. So that is creating flexibility in terms of the use that's in that unit throughout the day, and potentially into the evening as well. And I think, as I said, everyone needs a marshmallow or two. That thing that makes the centre irresistible and means that people are not going online. So I think, what can we learn from elsewhere? What has been successful? Now, again, we can't end up with a load of clone towns, because that again isn't going to be the answer. But one thing that has struck me is that garden centres seem to be very successful. Now, I know we're meant to be a nation of gardeners, but the garden centres around here, I'm not sure if they are being, it's the gardening side of things. They provide a place for people to visit. There's no pressure to buy anything. You can wander around a garden centre and nobody comes up to you and does the hard sell. You can rest, you can browse, you can interact with others. They change with the seasons. There's very clear seasons. I know some have already got their Christmas stuff up. It's a little bit early personally, but they can change with the seasons, which means there's always something new, so people go back to see what they've got in each season. And it's a mix of that sort of farm shop, well-being and art, which is just sort of pitches them very well towards families and older generations. I know the garden centre near me has got a soft play in it. Now, what soft play has got to do with the garden centre, I'm not entirely sure. But that makes it somewhere where families go and want to be. So it's looking at what elements of things like that have worked and how can they be delivered in a town centre. And I think the real key message is just being prepared for change. I think historically we've come up with a solution and thought we've done very well. Back in the early 2000s, urban regeneration, there was a lot of town centre schemes going on. Now some of those are the ones that have got a lot of vacant units. So it's a question of being agile, ready to change, and prepared to accept that sometimes something hasn't worked. So let's not carry on with that. Let's change what we're doing and find the solution. Having just said find the solution, there is no solution. The future of town centres will be an evolution, and it will be changing as government policy changes, as people's desires and aims and ambitions change. And I think it's a journey. It's a bit of a roller coaster, but it's definitely a fascinating journey. And I hope you found something useful in this. And if you've got any easy questions, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny, for that. A nice, concise and very tasty presentation with marshmallows provided by Tom. We have plenty of time, I think, for questions to elaborate, and we're starting to get them into the chat. So I will draw your attention to the chat. And Jane Ashdown is first off with thinking about young people congregating often the edge of towns in skate parks. But do you have any experience or perspectives on town centres that have integrated leisure park sport facilities that can bring young people into the town centre?
I think this is. I think if they were left to their own devices, there's possibly things in the town centre that skaters would naturally use. And I think almost part of the skate parks has been providing those facilities on the edge of town. But there's no reason why the benches that are put in the town centre actually. If you speak to the young people and say if we put a bench in the town centre that doubles up as a rail, I'm not quite sure on the skateboard terminology, to be honest, but if there's things in the town centre that actually could meet their needs as well, I know it's a little bit perilous having people sitting on a bench while somebody's doing some skateboarding trick, but there's no reason why there can't be elements in the town centre that they could access. Particularly successful example has been under the Festival Hall in London, where it was essentially a disused area, and skateboarders have naturally, it had some great concrete ramps and things, and over the many years they've naturally just sort of colonised that area as their own. I think the council have now put in barriers so that pedestrians don't wander into that area, but that has been so successful that when they tried to get rid of it, there was a campaign to maintain it, and it has stayed there. But yeah, I think it's the venturing out to ask them, what would make you come into the town centre, and if they say absolutely nothing, can't think of anything worse, then at least you ask the question.
Yeah. And how would you prevent drug trafficking, which someone's mentioned in those locations if they're attractive for drug trafficking? I would suggest maybe drug trafficking is actually attractive in lots of different places, not just skate parks. Moving on, Anita has asked, what is your observation on the value of public markets and the role they play in town centre revitalisation? And again, this is another dimension of the independence, isn't it? The potential for independence. What's your view on that, Penny?
I love a good market, and I think they're a great way of sort of a first step into the retail world, if you like. I think they're a great way of creating diversity in a centre, offering something different, letting locals try out something. I know there's been particularly successful, I can't think where now, but sort of teenage markets have actually the requirement to have a stall on a certain day is that you're under 18, and that again has been incredibly successful. So yeah, I think markets are a great way to, for a town to try, have we got the demand for this? What do people want? If I'm not talking about all of the fancy food markets, because I appreciate that a fancy food market has limited appeal when you actually need to buy useful things. So yeah, market's definitely a great idea. It's finding a way for the market to operate without everything blowing away. would be my
Yeah.
caution.
It reminds me of what Alan Rowley, who's I know on this talk, used to say about mixed use. It's a lot easier to keep it than to create it, and I think that's probably the same with markets. If you can keep your market and improve it, then you can make a contribution. It was about Robin Potter's question about landlords, because when you were talking about consultation, I don't think you actually had landlords. You had investors in. Is that the same thing?
Yeah. So landlords were sort of lumped into that group, if you like. And I think the issue that some centres are finding with landlords is if you've got an absentee landlord, it can be very hard. Equally, if you've got if there's a number of units on a number of centres owned by a fund, they're just interested in the figure at the end of the day, if that is making money, rather than each individual unit. So yeah, it's definitely key to try and get the landlords on side.
Yeah, and of course, it's in some respects it's in their interest, as you know, landlords should have a vested interest in maintaining value in town centres. I remember when the out of town expansion occurred in the 80s, particularly, it was Boots who owned a lot of town centre stores that worked with other landlords to try and deal with the out of town movement. So there is some vested interest there. That the trouble, of course, is that they often are remote, and for every town they might be based somewhere, and they probably don't take a lot of interest in the local issues. So that's
I would say where it's been particularly successful is the Crown Estate on Regent Street, working with Westminster City Council, just increasing the amount of public realm. And again, it's amazing what you can do when one landlord owns the whole street. That change was delivered very quickly, which if you've got sort of 10 different landlords is going to be very hard to achieve.
Yeah. Another question here from Francis. In town centres no longer primarily retail centres, but meeting places, do we need more pedestrianised areas? The role of pedestrianised areas. What's your take on that, Penny?
I think they're great, but they have to be done carefully and well thought through. So I went to secondary school in Hemel Hempstead, so obviously a new town. When I started secondary school, there was essentially a dual carriageway running through the town centre, and that's where the bus stops were. There was some parking, and that was a route through the town. They then pedestrianised it and moved the bus stop to the back of the units, basically by the service yard. So the little newsagents and all the other shops that used to do very well because all of these school kids would pile down there, suddenly weren't doing so well. And actually, when you visit now, it's a very wide space that's been pedestrianised. And in hindsight, it's one of those places that actually would it have been better if bus access had been retained, and close it to vehicles, but keep the buses going through there. So I think it is great. It has to be well thought through, and thought about how everybody's getting to and from the centre. We've got some great work that's been done in Kingston on increasing pedestrianisation, but then there's other work that seems to be slightly conflicting with it by putting planters everywhere, which are very nice, but suddenly the free flow of pedestrians is then impeded by the presence of planters. So yeah, I'm all for pedestrianisation. It can be done. It just needs to be, again, it's a no one size fits all. It's what works best for each centre.
Yeah, and can certainly do with a bit of consultation around that process. I know in Weymouth they've been having difficulties about some of the street improvements that have happened around the harbour there. On residential, Anthony's raised this one about the potential role of residential development and reuse in town centres as a part of a solution for revitalisation. How far and how beneficial might residential reuse be?
I think it's got the potential to be great, because it's going to bring people in who are going to be there and will, hopefully be spending money and spending time in those towns. I think that the danger we've got is it's great if we lose each end of the town centre. I think one of the other analogies I've done, it's like a piano keyboard. If you lose an octave off one end of your piano keyboard, you can probably still play most pieces. If you lose the same note out of every octave, you can't play every piece. So it's that piecemeal effect. If you end up with one unit has been changed to Resi, the next one's KFC, and then we've got a vacant unit, then we've got another Resi unit. It's that I think is going to be the issue, that nobody can then come up with a sensible redevelopment proposal for anything if you've got the residential units dotted around. I think it's reuse of upper floors for residential is a great idea. Quite often these are empty. And I know that I think in Poole, the Debenhams, they're looking at putting student accommodation in there. So there are ways to get people into the town centre. It's just making sure that we don't then trip ourselves up further down the line with an inability to redevelop the primary retail area because we've got 5 arbitrary flats in the middle of it.
Yeah, let's hope the horse hasn't bolted on that one.
Yeah.
I need to ask a very specific question. When you're working with town centre managers, how do you start the process of working out what problems need sorting out first? Is this part of the consultation process?
Yeah, I think it's. I think town centre managers quite often know what if they've been there a long time, they will know what the problems are. But yeah, it's the consultation process. It's finding the people that never come to a consultation event, but after you've done something, tell you you've done the wrong thing and give you a great long list of reasons, and you're like, we needed you at the beginning of the process. So it's identifying the community that are going to help you, because if you've got the community on board, it's a lot easier to deliver changes. If the public realm improvements you're then delivering have come out of a thorough consultation, actually, whilst there might be disruption when they're being implemented, actually the moaning about the implementation is going to be less if it's something that they've got ownership, if you like, rather than this has been imposed on you, this is what we're doing.
Okay, right. One question I was wondering about was that surge in the independents, and I was wondering, is that a temporary? Do you think that's a temporary surge, or do you think that's going to be sustained? Is that something that we can hang on to for town centres and work with?
I think it has got the potential to be sustained. There might be a high turnover, but if everybody who's had a dream to be a shopkeeper opens a shop and it fails after 3 years, if there's somebody else to pick up that dream and try the next thing, then I think independents are where the growth is going to come from, because multiples are just going in the reverse direction. So unless we get a significant number of new multiples coming in, we are going to be reliant on independents to take that floor space. So yeah, I would like to think that it's an upward trend, and I think things like markets as a test bed. I've got a great idea for a shop. Is it going to work? Actually, I've made no money 2 Saturdays on the trot. Maybe I won't throw my career in just yet and be a shopkeeper. I'll work on that idea and try something else. So yeah, I think with test beds there and pop-up shops, I think independents are probably, I'd like to think, the future. And because again, it could be your marshmallow. It's the uniqueness.
Well, talking about marshmallows, Joe Witherding has asked, what do you think Dorchester's marshmallow is, as it is now or could be?
Bearing in mind, I'm not a resident. I'm a part-time visitor, occasional visitor. I think that the tourism is quite strong, and I think obviously the Hardy connection. I seem to recall driving through Dorchester one weekend, and I was like, "What are those people doing dressed up by the side of the road?" I was assured it wasn't normal Saturday behaviour. So yeah, I think there's a strong Hardy connection. There's other history that the town's got, and I think that and is it the indoor market or the semi-indoor outdoor market could well be the marshmallows. But again, I'm not going there every day, so I think it's important that there's what the residents that rely on the town is also provided. But yeah, I think tourism, Hardy, You can't do your train service. That's not a marshmallow, definitely.
Right.
But yeah, those kind of things from what I've seen as a visitor.
Right, that puts the emphasis back onto the tourism partnership, which again is there's a tourism partnership which is now operating and producing lots of more material. So maybe that is part of the solution. Makes me feel more confident then.
I think there's another one just came in there from Jane, talking about prospects for town centres. Like Dorchester, with a relatively large vacant shop, formerly M&S, right in the centre. Should we be being bolder, thinking teen space as a public realm resource?
Penny?
Yeah, I mean,
actually, I meant green space there. Sorry, not teen space. Although that could be an option. a slip that is relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, I know a lot of centres have lost sort of significant units. From memory, it's attached to a few other buildings, so I'm not sure we can go down the green space route. The teen space route could be a good option. And the other thing to look at is the meanwhile uses. It's the temporary uses of units whilst they're vacant, and what they can and they can't be used for. That just carries on creating a bit of interest in the centre. Again, I think it's taking one building in isolation is tough, but it is one of the larger units in the centre. And yeah, if it's, yeah, I'm sorry, there's no solution. I can't think off the top of my head, but do we knock it down and create outdoor space? What is that space then used as? I mean, one of my big bugbears is that all of the parks around me have all this adult gym equipment, which is great until the winter comes, and you can't actually use it in the winter. So one of my big things is to put all of this gym equipment in town centres, and then whilst you're waiting for a bus, you can sit on a reclining bike and chat to the person next to you. So that might be a solution. Knock the building down and put an urban gym there. But if that doesn't work, don't sue me.
Thanks, Penny. Anita's asked about comparable heritage market towns. Would you suggest we might look at for inspiration? And do you have some good examples, either in the UK or from abroad, that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I can do some digging and come back to you, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Right. I was looking on the internet today, actually, and there's the EU have done a fair amount of work on looking at initiatives, but this is particularly around heritage promotion to attract people into town centres, to promote them. So there probably is material on the internet. The question really is finding good ones that fit the Dorchester requirements. Okay, well, we've got another question on experience of climate emergency centres in redundant shops. Is this the new growth area, ironically? Have you ever heard of climate emergency centres in redundant shops, Penny?
No, I'm going to confess I'm not quite sure what one is. I know what an empty shop is, but...
And Francis has just also added that there are places where advice can be given on adapting to climate change. The whole emphasis behind this question, or not the whole emphasis behind this question, but certainly one of the issues here is the diverse uses that town centre buildings, retail units could be used for. So it's another illustration of that, I think, and certainly it fits your more flexible approach to town centre floor space use, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's like tourist information. It's the green information centre, if you like, which potentially could be something that it doesn't necessarily need a permanent base. It can be in any vacant unit, and then if that unit is let, maybe it could move on to the next one, and it could provide basic information hand out recycling bags down to sort of more detailed, or I know we've got a library of things where I live, which is so that everybody doesn't have to go out and buy a power drill. you can hire the power drill. So, sort of building on that, everybody doesn't need everything. Maybe a library of things in conjunction with that. But yeah, there's certainly, I think we should stop seeing them as retail units and see them as space.
Yeah. Let's see. Gareth has just come in with his historic linear parallel street layout. Does increased lateral permeability deliver benefits or blind alleys?
I think it depends on if there's somewhere to go. I mean, when we look at retail developments, an edge of centre scheme, an outer centre scheme is more than 300 metres from the edge of the town centre, and that is deemed a distance that people probably won't walk. But if you're walking you'd probably walk 500 metres if there were interesting things that would keep you occupied, whereas 100 metres across a field you probably wouldn't do. So I think it's is there somewhere to go? Is there somewhere drawing people to the different locations? Because it doesn't matter if it's 10 metres away, if there's nothing there that I want to go and see, do, buy, I'm not going to work there, so you walk there. So yeah, I think it depends on, going back to the marshmallow, is there a marshmallow there? Is it part of a wider marshmallow? Am I on a marshmallow circuit? That is drawing me to those locations. Now, I appreciate with a historic street pattern, you're kind of tied in what you can do. And I think with sort of the alleys and the links between different parallel streets, I think it's how they're curated and managed as to whether people are prepared to walk down them or not.
Yes, seconded. Thank you very much, Penny.
Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your questions and for being gentle with me on the questions.
Have a good evening, anyway, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.